Welcome back, guys. Or if you're new to my channel, this is Automotive Anonymous, and that's the Toyota RAV4 Hybrid that I bought just a few weeks ago. This video is actually going to be a comparison between the RAV4 Hybrid to the vehicle, the daily driver that it replaced, which was a 2022 Subaru Outback Wilderness. It had the turbo engine, although this video will be relevant kind of for Subaru versus Toyota crossovers in general, as there's a lot of relatable factors between these, but specifically the RAV4 versus the Outback. Which one is a better vehicle? Which one do I recommend? Which one would I buy again if I were to do it again? There are actually a lot of interesting observations I've made about this vehicle, even in the very first day of ownership with it. Some things are better, many things are not. There's a lot that we need to talk about. There's a lot that we need to discuss between these two very popular crossovers that are sold in the North American market, but also a lot of other countries around the world. So there will be some variation between the vehicles in your own country. So this is going to be focusing on the big points, the big ownership impressions, and what is different, what is difficult between these two vehicles. And if you get anything out of this video, please consider liking it. Comment your thoughts and opinions below, subscribe if you haven't already, and soon enough I will also film a video about this RAV4 compared to our 2025 Subaru Forester. But let's get into this one, starting with the RAV4. First of all, we need to talk about the engine, and whether you're considering or own a hybrid or a non-hybrid, or you just want to know more about this platform, it's going to be pretty similar between it, whether it has the electrification components or not. But this is an Atkinson cycle engine, so that means there's direct and port injection, meaning there's different ways that the engine management can actually put fuel into the cylinders. So unlike the Subarus, which are direct injection, or a lot of other vehicles like that, there could be the risk on those engines of building carbon deposits up on the back of the intake valves. That's not a risk. This also has a CVT just like the Subaru, but this one, unlike having a heavy-duty chain like that one has, which is a pretty reliable transmission, this actually has gears. And the CVT on these has actually been proven to be a little bit more reliable potentially than even the 8-speed automatic in the non-hybrid, if you guys can believe that or not. At least from what I see on the forums, it seems like there are no CVT problems with this current powertrain. So as long as you maintain it well, as long as you give it its 0W16 oil, at least in my market, you really don't have to worry too much about the maintenance on this. All the maintenance bits are on the periphery, easy to access, easy to get to. The next few things to mention, 3 or 4 anyways, are all going to be right here in the interior. And there's still a little bit of shakiness in my voice. I'm sorry for that, guys. It is about 30 degrees outside, so if you could excuse that. But when we fire up the vehicle with the push button start, foot on the brake, if there's enough juice in the battery, and again, that battery is under the seats if you're unfamiliar, it's quiet. It doesn't make any noise. And you'll notice that the parking brake is turned on right there. I love that about the Toyota, that whenever you go into park, the parking brake immediately turns on. Whenever you go into drive, it immediately shuts off. If I'm inching forward and I come to a slight stop, you'll kind of hear the parking brake be like a second whammy to stop you and to hold you in place so that you're not going to put any stress on the actual park gear of the transmission. The vehicle's weight isn't going to shift around and potentially damage that after, a couple 100,000 miles, couple thousand trips. The parking brake basically is protecting the transmission. So when we go back into drive, I'm still in EV mode. The engine does shut on and off. In regular driving, I can even get off of an interstate, be going 70 miles an hour, and it immediately goes to EV mode, so I'm not using any gasoline. Or, up to maybe 25 to 35 miles per hour of acceleration. Right now, with the EV icon in the upper left corner, you can tell all of this is free driving in battery mode only, which is pretty cool. The vehicle does make some spaceship sounds, but what I like about this is if I get up to speed, the engine just kicked on, and I hardly even noticed. So that's another point. This isn't like an abrupt start-stop system. That's an afterthought on a lot of other vehicles. When the engine comes on and off, it kind of sounds and feels just like a small power boost, kind of like a downshift, kind of like a subtle transmission quirk. It doesn't feel like, this big shakiness. You can't feel the vehicle rumble. It doesn't feel bad for the vehicle. It feels just fine. And then the next thing to mention here is the backup camera. Takes up the whole screen because this, unlike the Subarus, is a horizontal screen. It's not vertical. And the clarity is actually nicer, I think. The wheel does turn the projections. I'm assuming the red is where your tailgate will bump into if it opens up, and beyond that is where you should be okay. But it's just a nicer, more clear screen. Currently, I do have Android Auto, Apple CarPlay. Basically, my phone disconnected because otherwise it stops recording audio when the vehicle's running and I have my phone connected to it. but it's a pretty nice, sharp system, and I like it a lot. I think this does a pretty good job. The next thing worth mentioning is going to be related to the miles per gallon. I actually filmed a video on my last day of owning the Outback and my first day of owning this, where I showed what they each do on the interstate, at least on that day in those weather conditions with the fuel that was already in the vehicles. And let me just say, at 80 miles per hour on that day, this vehicle was about 50% more efficient. If you want to watch the exact MPG numbers, you're going to have to check out that video. But this does a really good job on the interstate. I think it does do probably 3 to 5 MPG better than I would assume the equivalent RAV4 non-hybrid does, or the equivalent crossover with about a 2.5-liter engine, like a Mazda, like a Forester, something like that. But around town, that's where this thing really shines. I can get 40 to 50 MPG depending on how much traffic there's, how much time is spent idling, how much time is spent basically at a stop, because anytime you're stopped, the gas-powered engine is basically going to be turned off unless it's needed to recharge the battery, and even coasting, half the time it's turned off. So some of my drives have up to 40% EV mode in town. It's not going to be as good of mileage as what you can get in the RAV4 Prime, but that is seriously fantastic. That in a vehicle like this, you know, basically a compact crossover, you can get 40 plus in town. That's phenomenal. And now the last two things to mention, where I think the RAV4 slightly outshines the Outback in these aspects. One of them is actually kind of silly. It's going to relate to the key fob. The key fob on the RAV4 is actually slightly thinner than is on an Outback, so it fits in your pocket just a little bit better. And then I like that this, even though mine was a less expensive RAV4 than what my Outback was, even when I bought it brand new 3 years earlier, this has remote start through the key. You just press and then hold on the third time the lock button, and this vehicle will start. I don't necessarily love that the engine turns off as soon as you open the door, but it's cool that you don't have to pay for a second key fob to have remote start on at least the upper trim levels. But I do need to mention that some people have reported that with their 2025 hybrids, like with the Camry, it no longer shuts off the engine when you open the door, and that's really cool that Toyota finally offers that feature. And they're not just making it difficult and making it be that's their kind of dumbed down way of making an anti-theft device. When you do open the door on other vehicles with this system and it doesn't shut off, you are going to still have to push the power button with your foot on the brake, but that's less abrupt. It's one less start and stop every time you want to use that feature. And so I don't mind too much, and I'm usually okay with that. And then the last thing worth mentioning is the steering on this vehicle, especially at interstate speeds. It's not nearly as sensitive as Subaru, so it feels a little bit stiffer when you're turning the wheel. It's a little bit harder to turn. It's not like a Mazda. It's not quite that stiff and sporty, but it does still feel better and less sensitive than a Subaru. Plus, the leather-wrapped wheel feels really nice, and the heated feature between those lines gets very warm. But now it's time to talk about the Subaru Outback, the one that I replaced with this. I actually kept that vehicle for 3 years, which is about a year longer than I've ever kept a vehicle, and that's because it was so dang good. And I still think that I don't have any hard feelings towards them, and as long as we always own one in the family, I'll be pretty happy. But that vehicle has a far superior all-wheel drive system to this. This one only has a 50 horsepower electric motor in the rear that's going to kick in once you're already losing control. The whole gasoline engine up front, that only powers the front wheels. It has no physical mechanical connections to the rear. Unlike the Subaru, even the regular non-turbo Outbacks or other non-turbo Subarus, you know, you have 180 horsepower and 50% can go to the rear. So at least in those cases, you get 90 horsepower to the rear. Or in the case of my turbo, I could get up to about 130 horsepower to the rear. So 2.5 times the control, 2.5 times, and it's preventative. It's not after an afterthought. It's not hoping that the electric motor senses that it's time to kick in and that it actually gives you enough juice. It's, you know, I think it's pretty obvious that the Subarus with their mechanical system, they are no joke in the snow. They're basically like driving a tank. Mine also had severe weather rated tires, which definitely helps out, and I'm excited to see how this does. So I do need to be careful about what I say. But physically, mechanically, this is not the same. This is not the same quality, and all all-wheel drive systems are not created equal. And now that we've gotten the all-wheel drive system out of the way, that kind of actually feeds into the next point, which is handling. This RAV4 kind of handles like a front-wheel drive vehicle, and that's partially due to the fact that this basically is a front-wheel drive vehicle with, again, 50 horsepower electric motor in the rear. So I noticed that day one when I was getting off one of the interstate off-ramps in the area that I had bought this from, And I could not take a corner nearly as fast as I could in the Subaru, and that was immediately noticeable. And it was kind of funny actually, because I haven't really driven a lot of front-wheel drive cars since my first one in high school. So that's been quite a while, and it was kind of a good memory, but a good realization that not everything is going to handle as well as the Subaru. So whether it is snow or just pavement with some speed, or, you know, a wet road, if you don't have a good all-wheel drive system, if the vehicle in general isn't well balanced, you're going to feel that and you're not going to handle as well and be as able to maneuver out of the way of other obstacles. This next point isn't really the RAV4's fault. It's just the fact that this is a compact crossover, and the Outback was technically a mid-sized crossover, but I'm going to open up the hatch and I'm going to show you the storage space. Because this vehicle is about a foot shorter than the Outback, you have basically a foot less room. And I personally really like that room. Like if we have one of the sides of the seats down to have the dog kennel or anything like that, we kind of need the extra length. And when you don't have the extra length, you have to start packing stuff up tall. I'll show you an example that we recently did with our Subaru Forester on a road trip. You can easily fit, you know, enough stuff for 2-3 people, maybe 3 people and a dog, but you're gonna have to start to stack vertically because you quickly run out of length. So that's kind of unfortunate, but it's no fault necessarily of the RAV4. That's just the size difference between the vehicle I came from and the one that I currently have. And then the next thing worth mentioning where the Subaru is far superior than this vehicle is Toyota Safety Sense 2.5. I am not super impressed. I have heard 3.0 is a better system. I don't remember, that was probably what was in the Tundra I drove, but I didn't pay as much attention to that. I've never had an issue with the blind spot monitoring. I've never had this vehicle need to self-stop for me if I wasn't paying attention yet. And I have had that experience a couple times over the years with the Subaru, whether I was reacting or not. The system kind of kicked in prematurely. But I will say the system kind of reacts late, and it's just not as mature, it's not as competent as the Subaru. So if I turn on the accessories, you can see you still have the front sensors, you have lane trace assist, all of that stuff. If I go over to the safety section, sometimes you have to go into the menu, and some of you guys, when you buy one of these brand new, some of the settings will actually be turned off, so be very careful of that. But even with everything pretty high up on sensitivity, lane centering kind of sucks. It does worse than my 2019 Crosstrek did, and that vehicle was kind of horrendous compared to even my 2022 Outback, which is not even as good as the brand new Subaru stuff. So be careful. This is not a hands-free system. It cannot take corners that the Subaru can take. It cannot even keep me straight in the lane at interstate speed nearly as well, especially on a day like today when I filmed a little bit. And it was a bit windier out. This is, of course, a CGI filming. It's not real. But it was windy enough that I couldn't let go of the wheel for more than like 3 or 4 seconds before I'm needing to correct. And then the lane keep assist, the bumping of the wheel to keep you back in your lane, yeah, it's not as good as the Subaru either. The Subaru sometimes can overcorrect and actually bounce you from one side to another, but this thing, it's just not very strong. It's hardly noticeable, and it does thankfully at least pair well with the steering, where the steering is less sensitive than the Subaru. And maybe that's why the Subaru has a better system, because the steering rack ratio is more sensitive, and that's maybe what is needed for that to work so well. I don't know. Comment below if you guys do. But this, outside of cruise control, is better steering. This in adaptive cruise control is not. The next few points I need to make relate to creature comforts, and I feel like this is a fairly decent comparison. I know, again, these vehicles are not exactly in the same class, but they are cross-shopped quite frequently. And they're not exactly the same trim level, but also some of these features just are not offered on the Toyota, or the price premium is going to be pretty big. But this doesn't have auto-dimming mirrors or side mirrors like my Subarus have actually had for just a few $100s. It also doesn't have the built-in garage door openers, so I definitely do miss that, and I don't necessarily love that I went back to a physical garage door controller that I just keep in the door pocket. Also, one other thing is this doesn't have the PIN code on the back. So you can't get into the vehicle without having your keys on you. You can still deactivate the key by pressing the lock button and then double pushing the unlock button, and you'll notice the key flashes and it deactivates. But you can't leave the key that's then deactivated in your vehicle, lock the door, close it up, and then later come back to the PIN code like you can in the Subaru, like if you're hiking or kayaking or something. The next thing is the center console. It is pretty nice, but it's just a big single one. I actually kind of got used to the Outback having the hidden upper storage tray. That was just kind of fun because then you could have some hidden items up there, and most people don't know that this would then open up into two. And with the width of that, I mean, you probably could, Toyota. You could fit a little bit of storage in there if you really wanted to. And then creaks and rattles and interior. I at first thought that the wind quality, the wind noise on these vehicles is pretty similar, but in my case, I think the Outback was actually a little bit quieter. I also think that my driver's side door might be having a slight rattle, something that I never had in the Subaru, but it's hard to tell. And that's with all of this stuff removed. It's not like that's just jangling around, but it's at very certain roads, very certain speeds, so I'll have to pay a little bit more attention to that. But just some of the creature comforts I thought were a little bit nicer in the Subaru. I'm actually super grateful to be back in the land of physical climate controls, but with that, even though these are basically still digital, but they're controlled by physical buttons and dials, the Toyota app, at least for my car, it doesn't let you change any of this stuff when you remote start it. So it's gonna remote start the same way that you turn the vehicle off. And the Subaru, it could do all that and more. You could track down your vehicle, you could, like roll up the windows, you could lock and unlock the vehicle. You could honk the horn, you could turn on the headlights. You could do a lot more things on the Subaru app than you can on the Toyota app. Thankfully though, the Toyota app is free, and even though I'm not thrilled that these climate control buttons are so tiny and they're easy to miss and press the wrong thing, I do have to say it is kind of cool that you can car camp in this vehicle, and this was mentioned by one of you guys who watch, that you said when you car camp, your vehicle will turn on for about 8 minutes, then it'll turn off for about a half an hour, and that gives you enough juice in the battery to run the electric AC compressor for camping, and that's actually pretty neat. The other thing though that I don't like about this, so back to the Subaru's, favorable list, is in the Subaru, this is how you turn on the dome light. You just push it. In this case, you have to push the LED, and it's huge at night. It's super bright. I'm grateful for that. But it blinds you. When you look up to the light to try to push the button, you're going to easily miss the wrong button. You're actually going to call 911 on accident with SOS. And I just wish you could push the big, blatant button right there and you didn't have to push this tiny little button that's next to it. Ultimately, there are a lot of things that these vehicles both do really well, and a lot of this is personal preference. Everything I'm saying, heck, that's just my opinion, that's my perception of reality, that's just my experience, and it could be completely opposite for you guys. In all of my videos, some of you guys say how these vehicles, whatever the vehicle may be, that it has the best sound editing, that it sounds phenomenal on the highway. And other of you guys say that you couldn't stand them and they had to be sold within a year. So really, you guys need to get out and drive them for yourself if you haven't already. Thankfully, Toyota and Subaru dealerships, it's easy to do that. It's easy to find good dealers and people to work with to help you out and let you explore the vehicles, because I don't want you guys to just take my opinion for it. It's only one person's opinion filming a random video on a 30-degree freezing cold day. But overall, I've been super fortunate to own a couple really cool vehicles, a couple just really good daily drivers, and this is no exception. This is going to be really fun to drive. And it has been already. The hybrid system, trying to hypermile it, especially around town where you actually have some influence over that, it's been a lot funner than I was expecting. It's probably fairly similar to my Outback, as long as I'm not driving through what I perceive snow will be like in this, or I'm not taking a corner on an off-ramp too fast. This is actually a really fun vehicle to drive. The fit and finish might not be as nice as Mazda. The all-wheel drive system might not be as nice as Subaru. But to have a crossover like this that can get such good MPG, that can take me on a lot of adventures, and all the things that I plan to use this for the next couple of years, I'm really looking forward to my time with it. But also the Subaru is fantastic. If we didn't have a Subaru in the family already, I'll be honest, I don't think I would have bought this. I would have bought something else, or I would have gone with another Subaru, because I do think for the winters that we have, it's really important to have a good all-wheel drive system in a vehicle that's going to safely get you from point A to point B. I've seen lots of accidents on my drives to therapy in the morning, sometimes before snowplows. I've watched vehicles flip. I've seen vehicles on the roof and other vehicles completely destroyed and smashed by semis. And I don't recall any of those being Subarus. I don't ever recall seeing a Subaru off the road. It's usually pickup trucks. It's usually front-wheel drive cars. That is my concern with this being mostly front-wheel drive. So I'm excited to test this platform out more. I'm excited to share with you guys what I truly think of it. And if it's good, I'll keep it for a few years. If it's not, if this winter goes horribly, even on a good set of tires, if it just can't do it, then it just can't do it. And we'll talk about that later. But for now, I'm having a lot of fun, and I think Toyota has developed a good product. Overall, both of these vehicles, the 2025 Outback and RAV4s, they're only going to be around for another year before the new generation comes. But still, in that time frame, 500,000 people or more globally are going to be buying these vehicles. So I hope my video is insightful in some ways. Please let me know if it is. If it's not, comment that below too. Actually, there's one last thing to wrap this video up with. One last disappointment that I have in you Toyota RAV4, and that's that your doors don't open as far. That was another big change coming from the Subaru. That's as far as they open, which might look okay on camera, but in person, there's maybe another half foot of opening to be desired. It is hard to get a hybrid car seat in here. There's just not a lot of room. Not nearly as much as my Outback, but again, I know that's a different class of vehicle, so let me talk about the Forester, which I'll share that video soon. Even the Forester, the same size as this, with my seat in a comfortable position, I have a couple extra inches of room than I do on the RAV4. So it is tight. It's tight and cozy, but it's good, and I like it a lot. So anyways, guys, what are your thoughts? Comment below. Like this video if you got anything out of it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and take care. Hope to see you again next time. See ya.